Well, fake news is an expression that has now entered the global lexicon thanks to President Trump, who doubled down on his campaign against the mainstream media, with the White House issuing what may be the first annual fake news awards. We need more awards.
All right, I hope not.
The awards were posted on the Republican National Committee website, and they were dominated by CNN and the New York Times, who together won 6 out of the 11 mentions, mostly for articles that they themselves have corrected. Arizona's 2 GOP senators criticized Trump for the move, with Jeff Flake even comparing Trump's media attacks to Stalin's tactics. Well, we're joined from Washington by our Real News correspondent, Dan Raviv, and by Steve Herman, White House bureau chief of Voice of America News. Steve, besides your disappointment that Voice of America did not win one of those awards yesterday, what is your take, your reaction to this whole, let's say, ploy by the White House?
Well, first of all, I would say that we were all winners, so to speak, anybody who's practically in the media, because number 11 on that list was Russia collusion. So anyone who's reported about alleged Russian collusion between the Trump campaign and Moscow can consider themselves a recipient of one of the awards. But it was a very predictable list, and much fanfare about this. And in the end, it was a bit of a fizzle because there was no sort of reality show involved with it. It was just a tweet by Donald Trump that quickly crashed the Republican website where all of this had been posted, and it was not done as the White House, perhaps to avoid possible violations of federal law by getting staff involved at the White House in such an event.
Dan, this is all very reality show-esque and maybe humorous, maybe light, but this is also a very important story that really was pointed out also by John McCain in that Washington Post op-ed, saying that dictators and autocrats are taking a page out of Trump's playbook and using the term fake news for their own purposes, which certainly are not democratic.
And that speech you mentioned, Nurit, by the other Arizona senator, also a Republican, Jeff Flake. He lately speaks out a lot against Donald Trump. Flake is not running for re-election, by the way. Flake did indeed say that when Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union said that the press is the enemy of the people, what a shame it is that Donald Trump is speaking that way, and that the press is actually the guardian of our freedom. So said Senator Flake. Later in the day, though, President Trump did tell people to go to the Republican Party website, which then crashed. Now, there's some ridicule about that, but you could say that it also means there was a lot of popular interest. There still are millions of people who voted for Donald Trump, who believe in what he says, and think that the press, the media, are definitely his enemy, and so they would agree with him here. And by the way, it's a list of 10 specific stories done by CNN, New York Times, and some other outlets, and then, as Steve just said, number 11, the Russia collusion story, because there is no story. So it's a serious attack, and the White House is not letting up. Nurit and Kalev.
Well, Steve, Dan says it's a serious attack, and let me ask you how you assess what its real impact. Is this simply just preaching to the converted, or is there a drip, drip, drip effect from the attacks on the White House, on the media, that you think does eventually take its toll on the credibility of reporters such as yourself?
Yes and yes. And also, I think what is important to add is the international impact that you have other leaders, especially in autocratic countries, taking up this drumbeat of fake news and using that as an excuse to crack down on objective journalists and the free press in their countries. And that is the major concern among journalists and journalist organizations around the world, that the world looks to the United States for leadership in good times and bad, and here is an example of a toxic influence spreading with ramifications for the media globally.
Steve, I want to ask you a little bit more about those ramifications, because if we look at White House administrations, one replaces the next, policies change, as we have certainly seen this time around. But are you concerned that the attacks on the media and the discreditation of the media, and even the use of things like anonymous sources when needed, is going to have lasting effects far beyond this administration?
Well, I think we've seen this coming, at least here in the United States, for some years because the mainstream media, especially broadcast media, has become politicized and polarized. And not to get wonkish, but since the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, which gave the Federal Communications Commission oversight to make sure that what was on the airwaves was objective, or there was equal time given for opposing viewpoints. So I don't think that genie is going back in the bottle, but I think for most people it's hard to imagine that we would have a future administration that would take on the media in such a way. But there is also historic precedent for this in the United States. If we go back to the era of Richard Nixon, he even went beyond what Donald Trump has done. He had the FBI wiretapping the telephones of reporters here in Washington.
Dan, let's not spare ourselves some criticism. Except for the first award, which went to Paul Krugman for an opinion in an opinion column, which didn't pan out, and that was not a factual mistake. The other instances cited were serious, legitimate mistakes that media outlets made and corrected. Is there some legitimate criticism that perhaps some of the media is going too hard against the Trump White House and getting a little too enthusiastic and trying to, in effect, nail the president?
Let's put it a different way, if I can. Mistakes are made, absolutely normal in all times for decades and centuries. And as you said, just about every one of these stories that had mistakes in big media like ABC News or the New York Times, corrections were run. But today, the Washington Post, for instance, goes point by point through the stories and shows how, in fact, the stories were either correct or what was corrected. Now, it could be that there are some reporters and editors who want to believe negative things about Donald Trump. There are people in this town and across the country who think Trump isn't qualified to be president. Something wrong happened on Election Day in 2016, and so they're looking for problems, for flaws, maybe even for crimes in the administration. Of course, they shouldn't look too hard. We should let the facts speak for themselves. Narit and Kalev.
Steve, in this environment, is it difficult to let the facts speak for themselves?
Well, I think what we have are different audiences who want to believe certain facts and ignore others, and we see this on a daily basis, especially in cable television here in the United States, where you can watch two channels simultaneously and get diametrically opposed views as to what's happening in the White House and in the administration and the reaction to it.
All right, Steve Herman and Dan Raviv in Washington, thank you both very much for being with us. An important conversation, certainly, to have, no matter what you think about those fake news awards.
Indeed.